The clatter of a cheap ceramic mug hitting the floor is the last sound Harrison Shaw ever expected to break him. For a man who navigated billion-dollar mergers without flinching, a man whose name was a synonym for power in the steel and glass canyons of the city, this single sharp sound in a greasy spoon diner on the forgotten side of town was his undoing. Because when he looked up, he saw her. Not the ghost that haunted his penthouse nights, but a flesh-and-blood tragedy. 8 months pregnant, her belly straining against a cheap-stained apron. It was Rowan. His Rowan. The woman he had divorced 8 months ago to set her free. What he discovered next wouldn't just unravel a mystery. It would expose a devastating lie that would shatter everyone's world. The scent of stale coffee and fried onions was a world away from Harrison Shaw's usual olfactory landscape of Italian leather expensive cologne and the crisp, clean air of his high-rise office. He was only in this part of town, a sprawling, anonymous suburbia of cracked pavement and faded storefronts, to finalize the acquisition of a small but innovative logistics company. It was a deal he could have delegated a mere pebble in the avalanche of his corporate empire. But he'd been restless. The silence of his sprawling penthouse apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum. He sat in a worn vinyl booth at the corner nook, a diner that had likely seen better decades. His lawyer, a sharp man named Peterson, droned on about closing statements and liability clauses. Harrison wasn't listening. His gaze drifted around the room, a morbid curiosity taking in the peeling paint and the weary faces of the other patrons. It was an anthropological study in a life he'd never known. And then he saw her. She moved between tables with a slow, practiced grace that seemed entirely out of place with her surroundings. A faded blue uniform, the kind that was meant to be cheerful but only looked tired, hung on her frame. But it wasn't the uniform or the weary set of her shoulders that made Harrison's blood run cold. It was the swell of her belly, a perfect, pronounced curve that the thin fabric of her apron couldn't hide. She was heavily pregnant. His mind refused to process it. It had to be a trick of the light, a doppelganger, a cruel figment of his sleep-deprived imagination. But then she turned, pushing a stray strand of auburn hair from her face, and the light from the grimy window caught her profile. Rowan Davies, his ex-wife. The air evacuated his lungs. The drone of his lawyer faded into a dull buzz. The clatter of cutlery became a distant echo. The entire universe constricted to that single point in space, Rowan balancing a tray of half-eaten pancakes and empty coffee mugs. Memories violent and unbidden ambushed him. Rowan in a custom-made gown at a Parisian gala, her laughter echoing over the clinking of champagne flutes. Rowan in his kitchen at 3 a.m., her face dusted with flour, playfully flicking dough at him. Rowan across from him in their lawyer's office, her face a mask of resolute sorrow, uttering the words that had cleaved his life in two. "I can't do this anymore, Harrison." Their divorce had been civilized. That was the word the papers had used. Quiet, fast, with an ironclad NDA. The official reason was the classic meaningless, irreconcilable differences. Harrison had told himself it was an act of mercy. He was suffocating her. His world of ruthless ambition, of 20-hour workdays, of constant threat from corporate predators, was a gilded cage. He had seen the light dim in her eyes, the spontaneous joy curdle into anxious compliance. The divorce, he reasoned with the cold logic he applied to his business deals, was the only way to save her. He had given her a settlement that would ensure she would never have to work another day in her life. A golden parachute from the burning wreckage of their marriage. So what was she doing here, in this place looking like this? Her eyes, the same warm hazel eyes that had once looked at him with unadulterated love, swept across the diner. For a terrifying, heart-stopping second, they met his. There was no flicker of recognition, just a blank, professional sweep. He was just another customer, another face in the blur of her workday. The anonymity of her gaze was more painful than any accusation she could have leveled at him. "Mr. Shaw Harrison." Peterson's voice broke through the fog. "The signature line." Harrison fumbled for the pen, his hand shaking so badly he could barely scrawl his name. He couldn't breathe. The walls of the diner were closing in. He needed to get out. "Excuse me," he mumbled, shoving the signed papers across the table without another glance. He stood up so abruptly, his chair screeched against the linoleum. He threw a $100 bill onto the table, not even registering Peterson's surprised expression. He had to flee. He couldn't confront her. Not like this. What would he even say? "I divorced you to give you a better life. So why are you living my worst nightmare?" He pushed open the diner door, the little bell above it chiming a mocking farewell. The cold afternoon air hit him like a physical blow. But it did nothing to clear his head. He stumbled towards his waiting town car, the city skyline a distant, taunting silhouette of the life he had built. A life that suddenly felt hollow, a monument to a victory that meant nothing. He had walked away from their marriage to set Rowan free. But as his car sped away, leaving the corner nook and the pregnant woman inside it, behind a horrifying new reality began to dawn on him. He hadn't set her free. He had thrown her to the wolves. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and silence, 70 stories above the city's ceaseless hum. It was Harrison's kingdom, a space curated to perfection, with minimalist art, polished chrome, and sprawling views that were meant to inspire a sense of dominion. Tonight, they only made him feel small and utterly isolated. The city lights glittered below, like a galaxy of indifferent stars. He paced the length of the Italian marble floor. The image of Rowan in that cheap uniform burned into his retinas. He had untied his tie, the silk fabric feeling like a noose. His suit jacket was slung over a chair, worth more than the entire inventory of the corner nook. The irony was a bitter pill. He poured a glass of scotch, the amber liquid sloshing against the crystal. He didn't drink it. He just held it. The cold glass a small, solid anchor in the swirling chaos of his thoughts. The settlement. That was the linchpin, the one piece of the puzzle that made no sense. He had been insistent, overriding his own lawyers. He hadn't just given her a payout. He had structured a trust. $10 million. Not just cash, but a portfolio of stable income-generating assets. It was designed to provide her with a substantial six-figure income annually for life without ever touching the principal. It was untouchable, unassailable. It was freedom quantified and delivered. There was no conceivable way she could have spent it all. Not in 8 months. Not Rowan. She was the most financially prudent person he knew. When they were first married, she had insisted on creating a budget, much to his amusement. She would track their household spending on a spreadsheet, celebrating when she came in under her own projections for groceries. He used to tease her, telling her she could buy the entire grocery store chain if she wanted. She'd just smiled and said, "That's not the point, Harrison. The point is being mindful." Mindful. When had he stopped being mindful of her? He finally took a swallow of the scotch. It burned, a welcome, grounding sensation. He couldn't solve this alone. He needed an outside perspective. He needed his friend. He pulled out his phone and dialed. It rang twice before a familiar, slightly weary voice answered. "Finn, you awake?" "For you." "Sure, always," Finian O'Connell replied. His voice had the warm, gravelly cadence of a man who had seen Harrison at his best, and more importantly, at his worst. "Don't tell me you've acquired another country before breakfast." "I saw her, Finn." Harrison's voice was low, strained. "I saw Rowan." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Finn knew the raw nerve that name represented. "Okay," he said slowly, his tone shifting from casual to serious. "We're at a charity event, the gallery opening on 5th, at a diner, in Westbrook." "Westbrook?" Finn sounded incredulous. "What the hell were you doing in Westbrook? And what was she doing there? She was working." Harrison said the words tasting like ash. "As a waitress." Another longer silence. Harrison could picture Finn running a hand through his perpetually messy hair, processing the sheer absurdity of it. "A waitress," Finn repeated, not as a question, but as an attempt to make the word fit into his understanding of the universe. "Rowan Davies, a waitress. And she's pregnant." Harrison added the confession, barely a whisper. She's very pregnant. At least 8 months, I'd say." "Jesus Christ," Finn breathed. The expletive was a prayer, a curse, and an expression of pure shock all in one. "Harrison, are you sure? Could it have been someone who looked like her? It was her." Harrison insisted, his voice cracking. "I saw her face. Our eyes met. She didn't recognize me. Or she pretended not to. I don't know which is worse." Finn let out a long, slow whistle. Okay, let's break this down. The settlement. You set her up for life. She should be sunning herself on a private beach in the Maldives, not slinging hash in Westbrook. What happened to the money? That's the question, isn't it? Harrison paced faster, the agitation making him feel caged. "I don't know. Did she refuse it? Did she give it all away to some charity? Is this some kind of self-flagellation? A way to punish me by punishing herself?" He was rambling, the theories growing wilder, more desperate. "Whoa, slow down," Finn interjected, his voice calm and steadying. "Let's rewind. The divorce. You told me you ended it because you were turning her into a corporate wife. Because you were killing her spirit. You thought you were being noble, remember?" "I remember," Harrison said bitterly. "A regular knight in shining armor. Wasn't I? I signed the papers, transferred the funds, and walked away, patting myself on the back for my great sacrifice. I told myself it was for her, but maybe it was for me. Maybe I just couldn't stand to see her unhappiness any more because it reflected my own." It was a thought that had lurked in the dark corners of his mind for months, one he'd never dared give voice to. He had cut out the part of his life that was unhappy surgically and efficiently, just like a failing division in his company. But Rowan wasn't a division. She was a person. The person. "And the baby Harrison," Finn said, his voice gentle. "The timing. 8 months. The divorce was finalized 8 months ago." The unspoken question hung in the air, thick and heavy. "Is it yours? I don't know," Harrison admitted, sinking onto the edge of his bed. The vast, empty space beside him felt like a physical accusation. "We were distant toward the end. The last couple of months were just quiet resentment and separate rooms. But it's possible. Of course it's possible. He thought back. The timeline was razor thin. A business trip to Tokyo. A tense reconciliation when he returned a single night where the silence had broken and they had sought comfort, if not passion, in each other's arms. It was a brief, desperate attempt to find the people they used to be. Had that one night created a new life, a life he had known nothing about? If it is yours, why wouldn't she tell you? Finn pressed. Even if she hated you, a child changes everything. Child support inheritance, the Shaw name. Why would she turn her back on all of that to work in a diner? Pride, Harrison said instantly. It would be pride. She would see it as coming back to me defeated. She would see it as admitting she couldn't make it without me. That was her biggest fear, Finn. Being an accessory to my life. Mrs. Harrison Shaw. She hated it. She wanted to be Rowan Davies, the artist who painted landscapes, not Rowan Shaw, the wife who hosted dinner parties. He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. The city lights blurred into a watercolor painting. A painting Rowan would have appreciated. I have to find out what happened, Harrison said, his voice hardening with a new resolve. I'm not going to let this stand. I don't care what she wants or what her pride dictates. No wife of mine, ex-wife or not, will live like that. And if that child is mine... He trailed off, the implication clear. What are you going to do? Finn asked. I'm going to do what I do best, Harrison replied, a cold fire igniting in his gut. I'm going to investigate. I'm going to get answers. I'll call my head of security, get a team on it. A discreet one. I want to know everything. Where she lives, who she's with. And most importantly, where the hell my $10 million went. He hung up the phone. The silence of the penthouse no longer feeling empty but charged. It was a war room now. The shock had receded, replaced by a familiar, ruthless focus. The deal-maker, the corporate raider, the man who never lost, was back in control. He wouldn't just fix this. He would conquer it. He owed her that much. He owed his potential child even more. The bell above the door of the corner nook chimed, signaling the departure of another customer. Rowan Davies watched him go, a man in a suit too expensive for this neighborhood, who had fled as if the building were on fire. She hadn't recognized him at first, not really. In the blur of faces and orders, he was just another shadow in a booth. But as he'd rushed out, the confident, commanding set of his shoulders had triggered a painful pang of familiarity. Harrison. It couldn't be. But it was. A wave of nausea entirely unrelated to her pregnancy washed over her. She gripped the edge of a table to steady herself, taking a deep, shuddering breath that smelled of grease and bleach. You okay, Ro? Rowan turned to see Phoebe Jenkins approaching, her brow furrowed with concern. Phoebe was a fellow waitress, a single mother, with a sharp wit and an even sharper eye for trouble. She was the closest thing Rowan had to a friend in this new, stripped-down life. Yeah, fine, Rowan lied, forcing a smile. Just a dizzy spell. Baby's probably doing gymnastics on my bladder again. Phoebe didn't look convinced. She glanced toward the door Harrison had just exited. That guy in the corner booth. He left in a hurry. Barely touched his coffee. Left a C-note on the table for a $5 bill. You know him? No, Rowan said, the lie feeling heavy on her tongue. Never seen him before. She couldn't tell Phoebe. She couldn't tell anyone. Admitting that her billionaire ex-husband had just seen her like this was a humiliation she couldn't bear. Phoebe shrugged, pocketing the $100. Well, his loss is our gain. This'll cover that new tire I need. Come on, your shift's over. Go put your feet up. You look like death warmed over." Rowan nodded, untying the stained apron with trembling fingers. Every muscle in her body ached a deep, weary pain that had become her constant companion. She retreated to the small, cluttered break room, sinking onto a lopsided chair that groaned in protest. Leaning her head back against the cool, damp wall, she closed her eyes, and the truth of her situation washed over her in a suffocating wave. Harrison had seen her. After all these months of carefully constructing a new identity, of hiding in plain sight, he had found her. And he would not let this go. He was like a shark that had scented blood in the water. His sense of responsibility, or more accurately, his sense of control, would compel him to act. She placed a protective hand over her belly, where a tiny foot was currently kicking a steady rhythm against her ribs. This was why she had endured it all. This tiny, innocent life. Her secret, her anchor. The divorce had been her choice. She had been drowning her identity, eroding with every society function, every fawning sycophant, every decision that was made for her own good. She had loved Harrison the man, but she was being consumed by his world. Leaving was an act of survival. The $10 million settlement had been a shock. It was Harrison's way of solving a problem, salve his guilt, ensure her silence, and neatly excise her from his life. She had wanted to refuse it, to walk away with nothing but her freedom, but her lawyer had convinced her otherwise. Don't be a fool, Rowan. Don't let pride make you a martyr. So she had accepted it. And for a glorious month, it had worked. She'd found a small, quiet apartment, started setting up a studio, and dreamed of a future where she could paint again. She had even hired a financial advisor to manage the trust, a man highly recommended by a subsidiary of Shaw Industries itself. His name was Gregory Finch, a polished, reassuring man with impeccable credentials. That was her fatal mistake. Trusting anyone connected to Harrison's world. Finch had been smooth. He spoke of diversifying of offshore investments with higher yields, of protecting her assets from unforeseen market volatility. He had her sign papers, dense, jargon-filled documents she hadn't fully understood. She had been naive, trusting the recommendation that had come from Harrison's empire. 2 months in the payments stopped. When she called Finch, his number was disconnected. His office was empty. The subsidiary that had recommended him claimed to have parted ways with him weeks earlier and held no liability. The $10 million, her entire future, had vanished. It had been siphoned off, rerouted through a labyrinth of shell companies and untraceable accounts, a masterclass in financial predation. She'd gone to the police. They had been sympathetic, but ultimately useless. It was a complex case, international, with skilled criminals who knew how to cover their tracks. There was little hope of recovery. She was left with nothing. Less than nothing. She was pregnant, a discovery she'd made the week after the divorce was finalized, a final shocking twist of fate, and she was completely, utterly alone. Her first instinct had been to call Harrison, to scream, to cry, to demand his help. But her pride, that stubborn, unyielding core of her being, had stopped her. What would it look like? The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry, and she was coming back to him penniless and pregnant. It would confirm all his worst assumptions that she couldn't survive without him. She would be a project, a charity case. And the baby would become a Shaw, another asset to be managed, controlled, and protected by an army of lawyers and security guards. She would not let that happen. This child would have a normal life. This child would be hers, free from the golden cage that had almost destroyed her. So she had done the only thing she could. She had sold her car, her jewelry, the last vestiges of her old life, and she had started over. She found the job at the diner. It was hard, grueling work, especially in her condition, but it was honest. It was real. Every dollar she earned was hers. Every ache in her back was a testament to her own resilience. She was saving every spare penny, dreaming of one day buying a small cottage somewhere quiet, a place with a garden where her child could play. Now Harrison's appearance threatened to burn that fragile dream to the ground. Phoebe poked her head into the break room. "You ready to go, Ro? My cousin's waiting outside to give us a lift." Rowan nodded, pushing herself to her feet with a groan. "Coming." As she walked out of the diner and into the fading light of the afternoon, she felt a profound sense of dread. It wasn't just that Harrison had seen her. It was the look of thunder on his face as he left. It was a look she knew all too well. It was the look he got right before a hostile takeover. And she had a sinking feeling that she and the secret she carried were his next acquisition. The report landed on Harrison's desk with a soft, definitive thud. It was 3 a.m. The city outside his window was a sleeping beast, but inside his office the lights were blazing. For 48 hours he had been a man possessed, fueled by caffeine rage and a terror he hadn't felt since his company's near collapse a decade ago. His head of security, a former MI6 agent named Bennett, with a face as impassive as granite, stood before him. Bennett was the best a man who could find a ghost, if the price was right. "The initial findings, Mr. Shaw." Bennett said, his voice a low monotone. Harrison opened the sleek black folder. His eyes scanned the pages, his mind processing the information with brutal efficiency. First, the personal details. Rowan Davies, residing in a one-bedroom apartment in Westbrook. Lease signed 6 months ago. No car, no listed assets. Employed at the Corner Nook Diner for the past 5 months. No known associates other than a co-worker, Phoebe Jenkins. No romantic entanglements. The report was clinical cold, and it painted a picture of a life of quiet desperation. Then came the financial section. This was the heart of the matter. Bennett's team had traced the trust he had established. As he'd suspected, the money was gone. Every last cent. "How?" Harrison's voice was dangerously quiet. "A sophisticated wire fraud scheme, sir," Bennett explained, pointing to a complex flowchart in the report. "The financial advisor she hired, a Mr. Gregory Finch, was the architect. He persuaded Ms. Davies to move the assets into a new holding company for better returns. The documents she signed gave him power of attorney. From there, he initiated a series of rapid, multi-layered transfers through a dozen offshore accounts from the Cayman Islands to Cyprus to Panama. The trail goes cold at a private bank in Zurich, known for its discretion. Gregory Finch." Harrison repeated the name, tasting it like poison. "The firm that recommended him a subsidiary of ours. Have we leaned on them?" "Heavily," Bennett confirmed. "They are in full panic mode. They claim Finch was a rogue agent, that he passed their background checks with flying colors. Forged documents, fake references. He was a professional con artist who played a long game. He vanished the same week the funds were fully transferred." Harrison's jaw clenched so hard a muscle pulsed. It was a plausible story, but it felt too neat, too clean. A random con man just happens to target my ex-wife a week after our divorce is finalized. The timing is too perfect." "My thoughts exactly, sir." Bennett agreed. "Random predators are messy. This was surgical. This was targeted. The level of sophistication suggests a great deal of resources. Finch was a ghost. He existed only on paper. The identity was created for this specific job and then discarded. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was an assignment. An assignment. The word hung in the air, charged with menace. This wasn't just a scam. It was an attack. An attack on Rowan. Which meant it was an attack on him. "Who?" Harrison asked, his eyes locking onto Bennett's. "Who has the resources and the motive to do this?" Bennett slid another folder across the desk. This one was thinner, containing only a single sheet of paper. On it was a name. Mitchell Graves. Harrison stared at the name, and a cold, chilling understanding washed over him. Mitchell Graves, founder and CEO of a rival conglomerate, Graves Industries. He and Harrison were titans of the same industry, locked in a brutal decade-long war for dominance. They had clashed over contracts, poached each other's executives, and battled in boardrooms and courtrooms. 6 months before the divorce, Harrison had won the biggest battle of all wrestling control of a multi-billion-dollar energy contract in South America that Graves had considered his birthright. It was a humiliating public defeat for Graves. Graves. Harrison looked up at Bennett. "What's the connection?" "It's tenuous, but it's there," Bennett said. "The last untraceable wire transfer in Cyprus was funneled into a real estate development project, a project that is secretly financed by a shell corporation. And after peeling back 5 layers of corporate veils, we found the ultimate owner of that shell corporation." "Let me guess," Harrison said, his voice dripping with ice. "Mitchell Graves." "Yes, sir," Bennett confirmed. "It's not enough for a court of law. Graves is too well insulated. But in the world of intelligence, it's a smoking gun. The money you gave your wife was stolen and funneled indirectly into his pocket." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't about money for Graves. It was about cruelty. It was a vengeful, sadistic masterstroke. Graves knew Harrison. He knew his pride. He knew Rowan's pride. He must have calculated that Rowan would never go back to Harrison for help. He had engineered a situation designed to inflict the maximum possible psychological pain. He didn't just want to wound Harrison in business. He wanted to gut him in his personal life, to use the woman Harrison loved as a weapon against him. A white-hot rage, pure and absolute, surged through Harrison. It was a fury so intense, it felt calming. The confusion was gone, replaced by a singular, chilling purpose. He looked at the first report again, at the grainy surveillance photo of Rowan, leaving the diner, her hand on her pregnant belly. Graves hadn't just stolen her money. He had endangered her. He had endangered a child. His child. In that moment, Harrison knew with a certainty that transcended logic or proof that the baby was his. It was the only explanation for the sheer depth of his rage, for the primal protective instinct that was now screaming in his soul. "There's one more thing, sir," Bennett said, his impassive face for once showing a flicker of something that might have been hesitation. "We ran a check on the Corner Nook diner as per your instructions. It's a failing business. The owner is deep in debt, looking for a quick sale to avoid foreclosure." Harrison looked up, intrigued. And for the last 3 months, Bennett said, an anonymous party has been making inquiries about a potential purchase. A party with very limited funds making lowball offers, trying to negotiate a private financing deal. The owner dismissed them as a non-serious buyer. "Who was it?" Harrison asked. Bennett slid a name scrawled on a small piece of paper across the desk. Harrison looked down. Rowan Davies. He stared at her name. The implications hit him with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just surviving. She was fighting. She wasn't just working a menial job. She was trying to build something. She was trying to buy the very place that represented her fall from grace, to turn it into a symbol of her independence. The sheer breathtaking audacity of her spirit, her refusal to be broken, struck him with a new kind of awe. He had thought his world had crushed her. He was wrong. She had more fight in her than he had ever imagined. He closed the folders. His mind was made up. He knew the enemy. He knew the stakes. And now he knew what he had to do. His plan had been to fix this for her to swoop in and restore her fortune to play the hero. He now realized that was the wrong approach. That was the old Harrison. That was the thinking that had led them to this disaster in the first place. This wasn't just about giving her the money back. It was about giving her her power back. "Bennett," Harrison said, his voice calm and precise, "cancel my appointments for the rest of the week. Get me everything you have on Mitchell Graves, not just his business dealings. I want his personal life, his weaknesses, his secrets. I want the schematics to his soul. And get my legal team ready. We're not just going to war, we're going for annihilation." "And Miss Davies?" Bennett asked. Harrison stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the awakening city. "Miss Davies," he said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time in days, "is about to become the owner of a diner." The Oracle Foundation charity gala was the glittering apex of the city's social calendar. A self-congratulatory spectacle where old money and new tech collided in a symphony of champagne and air kisses. Harrison Shaw loathed it. He usually sent a hefty check and his sincerest regrets. But tonight he was attending. He moved through the throng of bodies with a predatory grace, his tuxedo a suit of armor, his face an unreadable mask. He wasn't here to network or donate. He was here to hunt. He spotted his prey holding court near the grand staircase. Mitchell Graves, a man whose silver hair and charming smile belied the viper coiling beneath. He was laughing, a glass of champagne in one hand, his other draped over the shoulder of a young starlet. He radiated an aura of untouchable success. Harrison felt a surge of revulsion. This man's laughter was paid for by Rowan's pain. Harrison moved toward him, not with aggression, but with a deliberate, unnerving calm that made people instinctively part ways. He intercepted a waiter, swapping his untouched water for 2 glasses of scotch. He approached Graves just as the starlet was giggling at one of his anecdotes. "Mitchell," Harrison said, his voice cutting through the chatter. Graves turned, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second when he saw who it was. He recovered quickly, his eyes narrowing with a familiar glint of rivalry. "Harrison, to what do we owe the honor? I thought you were allergic to fun." "I make exceptions for special occasions," Harrison said, offering one of the glasses of scotch. "I believe we have something to celebrate." Graves took the glass, his curiosity piqued. "Oh, and what might that be?" "Did you finally figure out how to crack a smile?" Harrison took a small sip of his own scotch, letting the silence hang for a beat too long. "I was in Westbrook the other day," he said conversationally. "Dreadful part of town. but the coffee at a place called the Corner Nook is surprisingly tolerable. He watched Graves's face carefully. There was no visible reaction, but Harrison saw it, a subtle tensing in his jaw, a flicker of stillness in his eyes. It was the tell of a predator that hears a twig snap in the darkness. "I can't say I'm familiar with the area's culinary delights," Graves said smoothly, taking a deliberate sip of his drink. "My tastes run a little more refined." "Of course they do," Harrison replied, a humorless smile touching his lips. "But you see, I ran into an old acquaintance there, my ex-wife Rowan. You remember her, I'm sure. Lovely girl. She was working as a waitress. Can you imagine?" Graves's facade of nonchalance was perfect, but Harrison knew him. He saw the flash of smug satisfaction that Graves couldn't quite conceal. It was the look of a pyromaniac watching a fire he'd secretly set. "Divorce can be difficult," Graves said with mock sympathy. "People change. Fortunes shift." "That's the interesting part," Harrison continued, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Her fortunes shifted rather dramatically. It seems the very generous settlement I gave her was stolen. A clever scam, a ghost of a financial advisor, a labyrinth of offshore accounts. A truly masterful piece of work, almost artistic in its cruelty." He held Graves's gaze. The air between them crackled with unspoken animosity. The polite fiction of the gala, the music, the laughter, it all faded away, leaving only the two of them in their private coliseum. "It sounds like she was foolish," Graves said, shrugging. "A sad story." "It gets sadder," Harrison pressed on. "Because a man with my resources can follow even the most convoluted of trails. And this trail, Mitchell, after all its twists and turns, ended in a place that smelled distinctly of your particular brand of refinement. A real estate project you're financing. Imagine my surprise." Graves's smile finally vanished, replaced by a look of pure, cold contempt. The game was over. "You have no proof," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You can't touch me." "Proof is for judges and juries," Harrison countered, his own voice a blade of ice. "I'm not interested in proof. I'm interested in consequences. You did this to hurt me. You used her, an innocent civilian in our war, to land a blow. You wanted to shatter my soul, as you put it to one of your lieutenants." Bennett's intelligence had been thorough, including wiretaps that had captured Graves boasting of his scheme. For the first time, a genuine flicker of shock appeared on Graves's face. He hadn't expected Harrison to know that. Emboldened, Graves dropped all pretense. A cruel, triumphant sneer spread across his face. "She deserved it," he spat. "All of you with your perfect lives and your self-righteousness. It was a masterpiece. I knew her pride would never let her go back to you. I broke the one thing you ever truly loved and made you watch her suffer from your gilded tower. It was better than taking that energy contract." Then he delivered the final twisting blow, his eyes gleaming with sadistic glee. And the best part, the absolute pièce de résistance. "She came to me for help." Harrison froze. "What? Oh, yes." Graves savored the moment. "About 4 months ago. She was desperate. Someone must have told her I was the only one with the resources to rival you, that I might enjoy taking you down a peg. She had a theory, some nonsense about a corporate conspiracy to defraud her. She begged me to look into it, and I had the exquisite pleasure of looking her right in the eye, that pathetic, hopeful look on her face, and telling her I couldn't possibly help. It was delicious." The word hit Harrison like a physical punch. He could see it. Rowan, pregnant and desperate, swallowing her pride to approach her ex-husband's greatest enemy, only to be turned away by the very man who had orchestrated her ruin. The sheer diabolical cruelty of it was breathtaking. The rage that had been simmering inside Harrison for days now boiled over. It was so pure, so absolute, that it manifested as a preternatural calm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move a muscle. He simply looked at Mitchell Graves and delivered his verdict. "You're right, Mitchell," he said softly. "I can't touch you in a court of law, so I'll touch everything else. Starting tomorrow morning, I am going to devote a significant portion of my net worth and every waking moment of my time to a single goal, the complete and utter dismantling of your life. I will poach your executives. I will sue you for patent infringements you don't even know you've committed. I will short your stock into oblivion. I will buy the debt of every company you've ever worked with and call it all in at once. I will find every skeleton in your closet, every dirty little secret, and I will air them on the front page of every newspaper in this country. I am not going to ruin your business, Mitchell. I am going to erase it. And when you are left with nothing, when your friends have abandoned you and your name is synonymous with failure and disgrace, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember the word delicious." He placed his empty Scotch glass on a passing tray and looked Graves in the eye one last time. "Enjoy your party, Mitchell. It's the last one you'll ever attend as a king." Without another word, Harrison turned and walked away, leaving Mitchell Graves standing by the staircase, his face pale, the champagne glass trembling ever so slightly in his hand. The hunt was over. The war had just begun. But Harrison's mind was already on his next, more important mission. He had to go back to the diner. He had to talk to Rowan. The street outside the corner nook was dark and quiet. The neon sign fizzled, casting a weak, tired glow onto the wet pavement. Harrison Shaw sat in his car across the street, the engine silent. He had been waiting for an hour. The gala felt like a lifetime ago, a gaudy dream from another world. This felt real. He watched as the last of the staff left until only 2 figures remained inside, visible through the large front window. Rowan and her friend, Phoebe. He saw them wiping down the last of the table's Rowan, moving slowly, her hand often resting on the small of her back. Finally, the lights inside switched off, and the 2 women emerged, bundling their coats against the chill night air. Harrison's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. No more running. No more hiding behind investigators and lawyers. He got out of the car, his expensive leather shoes making a soft sound on the gritty sidewalk. As he crossed the street, Rowan looked up. The streetlight caught her face, and this time there was no professional blankness. Her eyes widened in shock, then hardened into a look of weary defiance. "Rowan," he said, his voice softer than he intended. Phoebe immediately stepped forward, placing herself slightly in front of Rowan, a protective lioness. "Can we help you?" she asked, her tone laced with suspicion. "It's all right, Phoebe," Rowan said quietly, her eyes never leaving Harrison's. "I know him." She turned to her friend. "Could you give us a minute?" Phoebe looked from Harrison's expensive coat to Rowan's exhausted face, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "You sure?" "I'm sure," Rowan said, with a firmness that left no room for argument. Phoebe gave Harrison one last distrustful glare before nodding. "I'll be right over there," she said, gesturing to a nearby bus stop, making it clear she wasn't going far. The 2 of them stood in silence for a long moment, wrapped in the cold air, and 8 months of unspoken words. The chasm between them felt miles wide. "What are you doing here, Harrison?" Rowan finally asked. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice of someone who had built walls so high they could no longer afford the luxury of feeling. "I know what happened," he said simply. "The money. The advisor, Gregory Finch. I know it was a scam." A flicker of something surprise fear crossed her face before the mask slammed back into place. "It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me," he countered, taking a step closer. He had to resist the urge to reach out to touch her, to somehow bridge the gap between them. It wasn't a random scam, Rowan. It was an attack. It was orchestrated by Mitchell Graves. He saw her flinch at the name. He had his confirmation. She had suspected. She had even gone to Graves herself. The thought of it sent another wave of fury through him. "He did it to get to me." Harrison continued, laying the truth out between them raw and ugly. "He used you as a pawn in our twisted game. He stole your future to settle a score with me. I spoke to him tonight. He admitted it. He bragged about it. He had expected this revelation to be a bombshell. He expected shock tears, maybe even a sliver of gratitude that he had uncovered the truth. He got rage. "You see," she suddenly burst out, her voice trembling with a fury that was shocking in its intensity. "Do you finally see, Harrison? This is why I left. This is it. Your world, it's a cesspool. It's a pit of vipers who smile at you while they plot to destroy you. It's not enough to win, you have to annihilate. And the poison, it doesn't just stay in your boardroom. It seeps out. It contaminates everything it touches. It contaminated us. It followed me even after I was gone. I got out to protect myself, to find some peace, and to protect my baby from this." It was the first time she had said it to him. My baby. The words hung in the air, a definitive statement of ownership, a line drawn in the sand. The question that had been haunting him for days now had to be asked. His own anger and hurt were a knot in his throat. "Your baby Rowan?" he asked, his voice strained. "Or our baby?" The question struck her like a slap. The righteous anger in her eyes faltered, replaced by a deep, profound sadness. The walls she had so carefully constructed began to crumble. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time she looked not just tired, but fragile, as if the weight of the world was finally too much to bear. Tears welled in her eyes, shimmering under the sickly orange glow of the street lamp. She looked away from him down at the cracked pavement, as if the answer were written there. "Don't you think," she whispered, her voice breaking, "that if there was any way this baby wasn't yours, I would have told you? Don't you think I would have screamed it at you just to finally have something that you had no claim over?" The confession, wrapped in bitterness and pain, hit him harder than any denial could have. The air went out of him. It was true. He was going to be a father. He had a child, a son or a daughter who had been growing in the womb of a woman he loved, while she scrubbed floors and worried about paying rent, all because of a war he had been fighting. The full catastrophic scope of his failure crashed down on him. He had thought divorcing her was a noble act. He had thought investigating the theft was a responsible act. But he had been blind, so profoundly, arrogantly blind. "Why, Rowan?" he asked, his own voice now just a raw whisper. "Why didn't you tell me? Why go through all of this alone?" She finally looked up at him, the tears streaming freely down her cheeks now. The anger was gone, replaced by a sorrow so deep it seemed to swallow the entire night. Because I wanted one thing in my life, just one, that wasn't defined by Harrison Shaw. She said, her voice aching with unshed grief. I didn't want my child's first home to be a battlefield. I didn't want their name to be a target. I wanted them to be born into peace, not power. I wanted them to have a mother who was whole, not an accessory. I didn't tell you because I was trying to save our child from the same life that I was so desperate to escape. He had no answer. There was nothing he could say. She was right. Every word was a perfectly aimed arrow that found its mark in the center of his pride. He stood before her, the billionaire titan of industry, utterly defeated by a truth he could not argue with. He had lost her, and he had almost lost their child, not because of an enemy, but because of himself. Harrison Shaw moved not with rage, but with the chilling precision of a surgeon. The war he declared on Mitchell Graves was swift, silent, and absolute. Within days, a multi-pronged assault of crippling lawsuits, devastating stock market maneuvers, and the calling in of massive debts brought Graves Industries to its knees. Harrison didn't gloat. He simply executed the plan, dismantling his enemy's empire as a necessary grim cleanup of a toxic spill. The business world watched in awe as a titan fell, never knowing the deeply personal reasons behind the collapse. This, however, was merely business. His true mission was one of redemption. He quietly liquidated a fortune in personal assets, cars, properties, stocks, and used the capital to create an anonymous, irrevocable trust with a fiercely independent law firm. The beneficiary was Rowan Davies and her child. The instructions were simple: provide them with a lifetime of financial security, with a firewall so absolute that Harrison himself had no control or influence. As a key part of the trust, he arranged for the outright purchase of the corner nook. The deed was to be transferred directly to Rowan, free and clear. It wasn't a gift, it was restitution. It was giving her back the power and the future that had been stolen. Days later, Harrison sat on a bench in a quiet park near Rowan's apartment, dressed not as a CEO but as an ordinary man. When she arrived, she looked wary, but no longer hostile. The hard, defensive shell was gone. I met with the lawyers, she said softly, sitting at the opposite end of the bench. The diner. The trust. Harrison, this is too much. It's not enough, he replied, his voice quiet. It's a poor apology for my blindness. I see that now. You weren't just protecting our child from my enemies. You were protecting them from my world. And you were right. He placed a simple envelope on the bench between them. That's the last of it. The deed is yours. There are no more strings. I'm stepping down as CEO Rowan, taking a long leave of absence to figure out who I am without all of that. He stood, his heart aching. This was the only path forward. I won't bother you again, he said, the words heavy with finality. You can have the peace you deserve. Harrison turned and began to walk away, each step a confirmation of his new reality. He had taken only 3 steps when her voice, quiet but clear, stopped him. Harrison? He froze his back to her, not daring to hope. The diner, she said, and he could hear the faint smile in her voice. It needs a lot of work. I'm going to need help. The pay is terrible. But, she paused, the coffee is surprisingly tolerable. The echo of his own words of a life he was leaving behind offered up as a new beginning. He slowly turned. She was looking at him, a hand on her belly, offering not forgiveness but a fragile, uncertain chance, an invitation to build something new, not with his power or his money, but with his own 2 hands on her terms. And for the first time in forever, Harrison Shaw felt a flicker of genuine hope. From the shocking sight of a pregnant ex-wife in a diner, to the devastating revelation of a rival's cruel revenge. Harrison and Rowan's journey was one of pride, misunderstanding, and ultimate hard-won truth. Harrison thought he could fix everything with his power and money, but he learned that true redemption wasn't about grand gestures. It was about listening, understanding, and letting go of control. Rowan, stripped of everything, found a strength she never knew she had, proving that resilience isn't about what you have, but who you are. Their story isn't a fairy tale ending, but something far more real, a chance to rebuild not as a billionaire and his wife, but as 2 people, a man and a woman, hoping to build a safe, peaceful world for their child. What do you think happens next? Can a new foundation truly be built on such broken ground? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a powerful drama, and be sure to subscribe for more shocking stories you won't want to miss.